I never thought much about coffee until Daniel started noticing me. That probably sounds ridiculous, right? But it's true. For 26 years, I'd been drinking it black every morning at the office. Same routine, same mug, same quiet corner of the break room where I could scroll through my phone in peace before the chaos of the workday began. It was just coffee, just caffeine, just a way to wake up and face another day of spreadsheets and client calls and pretending I had my life figured out. Then, Daniel transferred to our floor from the Seattle office, and suddenly, coffee became something else entirely. I noticed him on his first day, which wasn't unusual. Everyone noticed Daniel. He had this presence about him, this easy confidence that made people gravitate toward him without him even trying. Tall, with dark hair that always looked just messy enough to be charming, and these warm brown eyes that actually seemed to see you when he looked at you. Not through you, like most people in corporate America. At you. Into you, maybe. He introduced himself to the team in the morning meeting, cracking jokes about Seattle rain and how he was still adjusting to the Texas heat, and everyone laughed like he'd been there for years. I hung back by the conference room door, half listening, mostly thinking about the presentation I had to finish by noon. When his eyes swept across the room and landed on me for just a second, I felt something flutter in my chest that I immediately pushed down. I'd gotten good at pushing things down. That first week, I barely spoke to him. We worked in different departments, me in financial analysis, him in marketing strategy. Our paths crossed in the break room occasionally or in the elevator, and we'd exchange those polite nods that coworkers do. Professional, distant, safe. It was the second Monday of his tenure when everything shifted. I was in my usual spot in the break room at 7:45 a.m., pouring coffee from the communal pot into my plain blue mug. The coffee was terrible, as always, bitter and burnt and probably sitting there since the night cleaning crew made it. But it was hot, and it was caffeine, and that was enough. No cream or sugar, Daniel's voice came from behind me, and I nearly spilled coffee on my shirt. I turned to find him standing there with his own mug, one of those expensive insulated ones that probably cost more than my entire kitchen cabinet of mismatched cups. No, I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Just black. He nodded, something flickering across his face that I couldn't quite read. Purist, I respect that. More like lazy, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Can't mess up black coffee. He laughed, and the sound did something warm and uncomfortable to my insides. Fair point. I'm Daniel, by the way. I know we met at the meeting, but I'm terrible with names when I meet 20 people at once. Marcus, I said, and he repeated it like he was committing it to memory. Marcus, got it. He poured his own coffee, added an obscene amount of cream and 2 sugars, and stirred it while looking at me with those eyes that seemed genuinely curious. You're always here early. You've been watching? The words came out more defensive than I meant them to. I'm observant, he said easily, not at all put off by my tone. It's a marketing thing. We notice patterns, behaviors. Don't worry, it's not creepy. Probably. He grinned, and despite myself, I felt my shoulders relax a fraction. 7:45, I admitted. Every morning. Quiet time before the phones start ringing. I get that. He leaned against the counter, apparently in no rush to leave. Seattle office was the same. Everyone scrambling, always urgent, always a crisis. Sometimes you just need a moment of silence with bad coffee. It is terrible, isn't it? I said, and we both looked at our mugs like they'd personally offended us. The worst, he agreed. But it's our terrible coffee, right? Something about the way he said our made my pulse quicken. I nodded, mumbled something about needing to get back to my desk, and fled like a coward. His "see you tomorrow, Marcus" followed me down the hallway, and I hated how much I liked hearing my name in his voice. The next morning, I told myself I wasn't thinking about him as I walked to the break room at 7:45. I definitely wasn't disappointed when he wasn't there. I poured my coffee, black as always, and headed back to my desk. Except Daniel was there, standing beside my cubicle, holding 2 cups from the coffee shop across the street. The good coffee shop, the one with the line out the door every morning. Morning, he said, like this was completely normal. Wasn't sure how you took it, so I got it black. Hope that's okay? I stared at him, then at the cup he was holding out to me, then back at him. You bought me coffee? I did, he said simply. That break room stuff is poison. Figured we could both use an upgrade. My hand reached for the cup before my brain could catch up. It was warm, and when I looked at the side, my name was written in Sharpie. Marcus, in his handwriting. You didn't have to do this, I said, my voice coming out softer than I intended. I know, he smiled, that easy smile that probably got him anything he wanted in life. But I wanted to. Consider it a thank you for being a friendly face in my first week. I hadn't been particularly friendly. We'd had one conversation, but I didn't argue. I took a sip of the coffee and almost groaned out loud. It was perfect, rich and smooth, actual flavor beyond just bitter and hot. Good? He asked, and there was something almost nervous in his expression, like my answer mattered. Really good, I said. Thank you, Daniel. Any time. He raised his own cup in a small salute and headed toward the marketing wing, leaving me standing there with expensive coffee and a racing heart. It happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the week, it had become a routine. Daniel would appear at my cubicle at 7:50, 2 black coffees in hand, and we'd talk for a few minutes before the workday officially started. Small talk at first, weekend plans, TV shows, complaints about management, but gradually it deepened. He told me about his divorce 2 years ago, how he'd taken the Seattle transfer to escape the memories. I told him about my parents not speaking to me anymore, though I didn't explain why. Not yet. That's rough, he said one morning, his eyes full of genuine sympathy. Family stuff is always complicated. Yeah, I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. It is what it is. Still sucks, though. He was quiet for a moment, then added, for what it's worth, their loss. I looked up sharply, but his expression was sincere. No pity, just honest conviction that I was worth knowing, worth keeping. Something cracked open in my chest. 3 weeks into the coffee routine, I started getting to work earlier, 7:30 instead of 7:45. I told myself it was to get more done, to have extra time for projects. But really, I was just hoping to see Daniel arrive, to catch him in the parking lot, maybe walk in together, to extend our morning moments by even 5 minutes. I was pathetic. I knew I was pathetic. This was just a friendly coworker gesture. He probably bought coffee for lots of people. This didn't mean anything, except he only ever brought 2 cups. I watched. I couldn't help watching. One morning, about a month in, I beat him to the coffee shop, stood in that ridiculous line for 15 minutes, and ordered 2 black coffees. When I got to the office, I went to his cubicle instead of mine. My hands were shaking slightly as I stood there, waiting for him to arrive. He came around the corner at 7:55, saw me standing there with 2 cups, and stopped dead in his tracks. For a horrible second, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, overstepped, misread everything. Then his face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen on him. You didn't, he said. I did. I held out one of the cups. Fair's fair. He took it, his fingers brushing mine for just a second longer than necessary. This is really nice, Marcus. Thank you. It's just coffee, I said, but we both knew it wasn't. Yeah, he said softly, looking at me in that way that made my breath catch. Just coffee. We stood there in the hallway outside his cubicle, drinking our coffee in comfortable silence while the office slowly came to life around us. And I realized I was happy. Genuinely. Simply happy in a way I hadn't been in years. That's when things got complicated. Because happiness is terrifying when you're not used to it. When you've spent most of your adult life keeping people at arm's length because it's easier than explaining who you are, what you want, why you're different. I started pulling back. Not dramatically, just small things. Staying at my desk instead of lingering to talk. Putting on headphones during lunch so he couldn't sit with me. Making excuses when he suggested grabbing dinner after work. The coffee kept coming, though. Every single morning, Daniel showed up at my desk with 2 black coffees, and every morning I took one and said thank you, and every morning I hated myself a little bit more for being such a coward. You okay? He asked one Thursday, about 6 weeks into our routine. You seem distant lately. I'm fine, I lied. Just busy, big project. He nodded, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, and I wanted to explain. Wanted to tell him that I was pulling away because I was falling, and that terrified me, but the words stuck in my throat like always. Friday afternoon, my manager called me into her office. Budget cuts, restructuring. My position was being eliminated. I had 2 weeks. I sat through the rest of the conversation in numb silence, nodded in the right places, shook her hand when she apologized for the 8th time. Then I went back to my desk, packed up my personal items in a cardboard box, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. I didn't go to work the next Monday or Tuesday. I ignored the calls from HR about exit paperwork. I ignored my friends' texts asking if I was okay. I ignored everything and everyone and sat in my apartment drinking cheap whiskey and watching reality TV and trying not to think about the fact that I'd lost my job and my routine and my morning coffee with Daniel all at once. Wednesday morning at 7:50, someone knocked on my door. I almost didn't answer. I was in sweatpants and a 3-day-old t-shirt, unshowered and probably smelling like a distillery. But the knocking persisted, and finally I dragged myself off the couch and looked through the peephole. Daniel. My heart stopped, then started again, way too fast. I opened the door. "Hey," he said, and he was holding 2 black coffees. "How did you know where I live?" I asked, which was maybe not the most important question, but the only one I could manage. "Employee directory." He held out one of the cups. "Can I come in?" I should have said no, should have told him I was fine and sent him away. Instead, I stepped back and let him into my disaster of an apartment. He didn't comment on the empty whiskey bottles or the pile of takeout containers or the fact that I clearly hadn't moved from the couch in days. He just handed me the coffee and sat down. "You disappeared," he said quietly. "I heard about the layoffs. Wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Marcus." He said my name like a sigh, like a prayer. "You're not fine, and that's okay. You don't have to be fine." Something in me broke. Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that he'd tracked me down and brought me coffee even though I'd been pushing him away. Maybe it was just that I was tired of holding everything in. "I'm gay," I said abruptly. "That's why my parents don't talk to me. That's why I've been weird. Because I like you and I didn't know how to tell you, and now I've lost my job and I'm probably going to lose my apartment, and I'm sitting here feeling sorry for myself like a complete mess, and you're straight, and this is probably so uncomfortable for you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out in a rush, and when they finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Daniel set his coffee down carefully on my cluttered coffee table. Then he reached over and took my hand. "Marcus," he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I'm not straight." I stared at him. "What?" "I'm not straight. I'm bi. And the reason I started bringing you coffee every morning is because I was trying to work up the courage to ask you out." He laughed, but it sounded a little broken. "I thought you knew. I thought that's why you were pulling away, because you weren't interested." "I thought you were just being nice," I whispered. "I was being obvious," he said. "Or trying to be. Apparently I'm worse at this than I thought." We looked at each other, really looked at each other, for the first time without walls between us. His hand was warm in mine, solid, real. "I like you too," he said softly, in case that wasn't clear. I kissed him, leaned forward and pressed my lips to his, tasting coffee and hope and possibility. He made a small, surprised sound and then kissed me back, his free hand coming up to cup my face with such tenderness that I thought I might fall apart. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "That was," Daniel started. "Yeah," I agreed. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked. "Like an actual date, not just coffee." "I just lost my job," I pointed out. "Shouldn't I be the one treating you?" "We'll figure it out," he smiled, that smile I'd been falling for since day one. "Together, if you want." "I want," I said, and meant it with everything in me. The coffee kept coming, even after I started my new job 2 months later, even after we made it official and I changed my emergency contact to his name, even after I met his parents and he met my friends, and we started talking about moving in together. Every morning, Whether we were at the office or at home or traveling for work, Daniel made sure I had my coffee. Black. Perfect. Exactly how I liked it. And every morning, I fell a little more in love with the man who'd noticed me in a break room and decided I was worth the effort, worth the daily coffee shop trip. Ah, worth knowing. I never thought much about coffee until Daniel started noticing me. Now I can't imagine my mornings, my life, without it, without him. It's funny how the smallest gestures can change everything, how paying attention to someone, really seeing them, can be the beginning of something extraordinary. He noticed I took my coffee black. Such a simple thing, but it was enough. It was everything. Total char count, 16,847.